Hello, everybody. My name is Jonathan Lips, and I'm going to present this webinar on an introduction to mobile web app testing with Selenium and Sauce Labs. First of all, I just wanted to make sure that everyone can hear me okay. If anyone is having trouble, please let me know by sending me a chat message. Likewise, if it sounds good, maybe somebody out there just let me know. Okay, thank you. So let's get started. As the title suggests, today we're going to talk about Selenium and Sauce Labs, and specifically on a sort of introductory level, how do you write Selenium scripts to test a web application? How do you do that with Sauce Labs? And specifically, is there anything special about mobile that we need to take into account? And as we'll see, testing mobile apps with Sauce Labs is just about as easy as testing regular web apps. So nothing to be afraid of. Okay, so here's the big picture. With automated testing, we are trying to take ourselves as a development community or a QA community from the cute but rather sorry-looking group of animals on the left to the shiny, wonderful, very efficient robot on the right. Although hopefully without so much annoying dialogue. No offense, C3PO. So how does this happen? How do we go from the Stone Age to the Space Age? As we all know, testing is an unfortunate but necessary reality of life in software development. Every small change that we make to our code can have unintended consequences. Let's say I'm working with some library code. In other words, segments of code that are used in many different places in an application. Maybe I'm writing in Node.js, and so the very same code is running in browsers as well as on my server in many different situations and many different files. And let's say I notice an inefficiency in this code and I decide to refactor it. I'm likely to manually check that the code works in the cases that I had in mind. But how can I be sure that I have in my brain all of the different paths through which that code can be exercised in my code base? It's pretty much impossible, especially as your code base grows. Not only is it hard to keep in mind, it's very expensive to check all these different code paths manually. Really, the only answer is to have some kind of automated testing framework. So automated is much better than manual, definitely. Some of the obvious benefits: you can run an automated script whenever you want, maybe every time you check in code or make changes. Whereas manual tests you have to run by hand, and it gets tiresome and tedious and boring. Over time, the time savings of automated testing is very significant. When you're running these scripts thousands or in the long run hundreds of thousands of times, it's much cheaper than spending your time doing this or hiring someone else to. Writing automated test code is also writing code, and in that sense it's a little funner for us developers than manually clicking around on websites or following rote scripts or things like that. So testing sucks, but we have to do it, so we might as well make it as easy and as painless as possible, and that's what automated testing is about. It's also what Selenium is about. A lot of you who took the poll at the beginning of the webinar said you've already written Selenium scripts, so this is all old hat for you. But there are a lot of benefits to using Selenium specifically to do your automated testing. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Selenium, I like to think of Selenium as a robot-controlled web browser. A typical web browser requires a human to interact with it, to click around, move the mouse, and if you're a QA human being, to check whether things are as you expect after the new code changes have been pushed to the website. You might go and click some links and type in some text fields and click some buttons and make sure that all of the data is being transmitted and displayed appropriately. Well, we can now do that automatically with code. And so Selenium is the robot that controls all of the different web browsers. And when I say all of the different web browsers, I mean practically all the browsers, Firefox, Chrome, Internet Explorer, Opera, on all the different platforms that are popular, Linux, Mac OS, Windows. So Selenium allows us to write automated tests that closely mirror manual QA. It's in the spirit of manual QA. You take a script or a set of instructions you would normally give to a person, and instead you give it to Selenium, and it executes them for you and gives you back the results. As I mentioned, Selenium controls a real browser using real interactions, the way that a person would interact with a browser. So in that sense, it gives you a broader type of coverage than running unit tests or little snippets of code that are designed to mimic browsers, or even other kinds of headless browser testing like Phantom.js or Zombie.js, things like this that enable you to mock up a web page and test it. Selenium actually uses a real browser, and so at the end of the day, it's the safest thing to test with. I like to call the kind of testing we do with Selenium functional testing, in that it tests the very outer edge of your application. It tests exactly what your users are testing or experiencing when they're using your application. Because of that, it's really great at turning up cross-browser issues, for example, ways that different browsers interact with your application differently and unexpectedly sometimes. It's also great at turning up integration problems in your web stack. So if there's a problem in your controller code, Selenium will uncover it because it will trigger some error. All it might see is that there's a 500 internal server error or something like that, but it will at least let you know that there's a problem with this particular behavior. Selenium is really easy to get started coding in because it has libraries that speak to Selenium that are available in practically all the languages. And it's an open source piece of software. So if there's a new language that comes out that you want to work with Selenium with, it's very easy to add support. Since this webinar is also about mobile testing, I think that functional testing with Selenium is very important, especially for mobile testing, as the number of devices that are out there keeps increasing. And as we just saw with the release of the iPhone 5, screen resolutions keep changing all the time too. And we're going to have medium-sized iPads, and we already have Android tablets and phones and devices which have all kinds of different screen resolutions. So making sure that things are visible on the page when we expect them to becomes a much more complicated task. And that's why something like Selenium is going to be even more valuable rather than doing manual QA on all of these devices, which are also hard to get access to. The main downside of testing with Selenium is that it can be a bit complicated to set up. You have to download and install servers that you run on your computer. You have to have all of the different browsers available to you, either on your own computer or by running virtual machines in computers in your office or in your local network. And you have to get all these things talking together. And this is possible, and a lot of people do it. But at Sauce Labs, Um, our job is to do all of this setup so that you don't have to. So at the end of the day, all you do is write a Selenium script and you get to run it on any browser or any platform or any mobile device that you want. So how does writing Selenium scripts work? First of all, I should point out that there's a bit of a wrinkle when we're talking about Selenium. There are actually two versions of Selenium that are out there in the wild. The older version, sometimes called Selenium 1, sometimes called Selenium Remote Control, was around for a while and did a really great job, but it has been superseded by a new standard called WebDriver, which is currently under review for being a W3C standard as well, which would be great because then all the browsers will support the WebDriver protocol natively. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Basically, all you need to know about this is that if you're starting writing Selenium scripts today, you should use WebDriver. So anytime there's a choice, go with WebDriver. It's much better architected, it's much faster, and it's the way of the future. So choose WebDriver. How does WebDriver work exactly? Well, as you can see in the image below at the bottom of this slide, WebDriver is built on a client-server architecture. So the icon in the middle stands for Selenium, in other words, WebDriver. And it runs as a server on your computer. On the left-hand side, we have the script that you've written to talk to Selenium in some language. So if you have very good eyesight, you can tell that this is a PHP script. And in fact, all of the demos that we'll be doing today are written in PHP. So this PHP script talks to the Selenium web server using regular HTTP protocols. And the Selenium web server talks to the different browsers that you have running on your computer. And it sends them commands like click or move the mouse or type some text here. Or it can also get information from the browser like, what is the text in the body element on the page right now? Or what is the value of this JavaScript operation? So Selenium acts as the hub between your code and the browser and provides a layer of translation so that your code can query the web page, ask about JavaScript, ask about events, ask about what text is shown on the page, and so on. And likewise, it can send commands to emulate the kinds of behavior that a real person would engage in on that web page. So we're going to move into a demo period here. And first, we're going to look at a basic Selenium test. Close this down. Before we begin, I just wanted to point out that the demonstration app that I've developed for this webinar is a PHP app, and it's built in something called the Yi framework. This isn't very important for understanding the logic of the test. Just wanted to let you guys know. So if you're looking at the code and wondering why I'm referencing this class or that function, it's because this is all part of the Yi framework. And all of the code that I'm using is open source and available on GitHub, so you can peruse it at your leisure later if you want to dig into the implementation details of the app that I'm going to demonstrate. So here's the app itself. It's a blog application, and in fact, I just stole it from the Yi code base as a demo. It has very limited functionality. So you can see it lists the different posts that have been added here on the page. You can log in. When you're logged in, you can create a new post. And apparently I'm not connected to a database. Well, you'll just have to trust me that this application works since it came from the code base itself. So let's look at a test that we might write for this application. This is a test class called WebDriverDemo, and you'll see that it extends a PHP unit test class. PHP unit is a test framework for PHP. It's probably the most popular one out there. And it comes bundled with support for Selenium, both Selenium Remote Control and Selenium WebDriver, which PHP unit calls Selenium 2. So let's take a look at some of these functions. On the whole, this is very simple. We have a test class, we have a setup function, which is run before all of our test functions. In this case, we just have one. And in the setup function, we are first telling Selenium what browser we want to use. We're going to say Firefox, and we're giving it a URL to start with. Here in the test itself, which is testing the login and logout functionality, we are telling the browser again to go to this particular URL, and then we're making an assertion. We're saying that we expect the title of this page to be Ye Blog Demo. And this title at the end of the line here is a way of talking to Selenium to get the title from the page. We're then doing some actions. We're clicking on a link that has the text login. And now we're getting an element by its name attribute, and we're sending it a value. This is akin to typing into a form element. So we're typing in a username and password, and then we're clicking the button that I'm specifying here, which doesn't have a very helpful name, as it turns out. After we click the button, we're getting the text of the body element of the page. And then we're asserting that that text contains the word logout. In other words, we're saying that if we see logout somewhere on the page, we'll assume that we've logged in correctly. You might be thinking that this test is a bit brittle. It could pass vacuously if somebody typed in a blog post that had the word logout in it. So this should really be better, but I think you can get the point of what we're trying to do. Now we're clicking the logout link and doing the same thing with the word login. So we're testing that the word login shows up, meaning that we have successfully logged out. So how do we run this test? First of all, remember that I said that Selenium was a server that runs on your computer. Well, we need to launch the server so that it can be sitting and listening for commands from our script. So I'll type in the alias that I have, which launches the Selenium server. Okay, we're ready. And I'm in the tests directory of this demonstration app. And here we have the test file that we are looking at. And I've created a shell alias for PHP unit, so I can just run it right from here. Okay, and off we go. You'll see that on the right-hand side, we've received a new session from the Selenium server, and Firefox is opening up and doing the checks, typing things in, and our test passed. So that's great. Now, this is a pretty bare bones test. It's not very complete. Ideally, we would like to exercise a lot more of the functionality of this application. It's worth pointing out that we expect all of this functionality to work both on mobile devices and on web devices. So in other words, this app is designed to work identically on both mobile devices and the regular web browsers. So we don't have a distinction in the tests for those two classes of device. Okay, here's some more tests. And let's take a little closer look at how this is all architected here. So this is a class called comment test. It's testing the commenting functionality of this blog application. And it extends something called C WebDriver test case. So what's that? Well, it's a class that I wrote in order to be able to talk to the application as well as the web page. So this class extends a class from the new PHP library that we're working on at SOS. We're actually demoing it for the first time here in this webinar, and it should be released in a couple days. And it's designed to extend PHP unit in a way that makes writing Selenium tests for SOS or for your local machine super, super straightforward and easy. So this is our subclass. And you'll see here that we have a static array called browsers. This is how we tell Selenium which browsers we want to run our tests on. So I have a bunch of them commented out, and we'll uncomment them and run them later on. For now, I'm just asking for Firefox on my local machine. Another interesting bit here, we have another class called C Web Fixture. This is what enables us to load in data fixtures in a way which the Yi framework likes, get data into our test application every time we run tests, and have access to the attributes of the test data that we put in so we can check and make assertions against that test data. So this is essentially a way of creating a test class that not only can send Selenium commands and drive a browser, but also has access to all of the application functions. This is really useful in different scenarios. Let's take a look at one. Let's take a look at this function here. It's called test add. So it's testing the addition of a new comment. Line by line, first of all, we're going to URL. This is the URL of one of the posts that gets automatically loaded from our fixture data. We are typing in a new comment here. We're entering in a name, an email address, and some comment text. And then we're clicking submit. And now we wait for the next page to load. And then here's where we actually talk to the database which is powering the Yi application. So this is Yi specific code that isn't important to know anything particular about, other than what it's doing is it's getting all of the comments which have been added to posts in the application. And then it's taking the most recent one, getting its attributes, namely the content attribute, and asserting that that is equal to the text that we just sent in as our comment from the web page. In other words, we're asserting that what we typed in on the web page matches what eventually made it into the database. And this is very powerful because it enables us to check the integration of our whole stack to make sure that we're not just accidentally seeing the right text on the next web page, where it actually got into our database correctly. So let's run this and see how it works. So we'll run PHP unit again. And this time we want to run just the test in question in just this test file. Okay, looks like everything worked. So we typed it in and we checked the database, and it was all connected. So one of the things that we want to do when we have a suite of Selenium tests is to make sure that these tests pass in a number of different browsers. That's kind of the whole point of Selenium. So as I pointed out before, we have the ability to add additional browsers fairly easily. So let's add Chrome, because that's another browser that I have on my local computer. And let's go ahead and just run all the tests that we have. I think we've got 11 or 12 or something like that. So you'll see that, well, there's a couple things to notice here. One is that Firefox in particular is kind of annoying in that it pops up every time I'm running a test and prevents me from doing work. If I were trying to code right now, Firefox would be popping up and taking focus and keeping me from doing my work. Chrome is a little nicer. You can see that it's kind of popping up in the background. Missed it there. But second thing you'll notice is that all of these tests are running one at a time. That can be okay in an environment where you're running a lot of unit tests, because unit tests are extremely quick. Don't take any time at all to run. So getting through a suite of 1,000 unit tests might only take a few minutes. But Selenium tests take longer because we're launching a new browser. It's having to wait for my own local host server to respond to requests and so on. So there's just a lot of time costs associated with running Selenium tests. So eventually we're going to want to figure out a way to run these tests in parallel rather than one at a time, so that we can really leverage the power of Selenium. Of course, running our tests in parallel means that we have to have written them in a way that they can be run in parallel. In other words, a way that they don't depend on each other or need to be run sequentially for some reason. And at Sauce, that's definitely something that we try and encourage people to do, is to write all of their tests in a way that they're completely isolated from one another, so that dependencies never contaminate or pollute other tests or lead to strange errors that are very difficult to debug. So anyway, this is kind of a long break from my work, and I think it's another good reason to use Sauce, honestly, so that you don't have to sit here and wait for all of your tests to run. You can keep coding and just kick off tests against Sauce whenever it's convenient for you. So how do we integrate with Sauce? Well, it's very, very easy. Using the sausage library like we are right now, all we have to do is tell PHP-unit that we want to run some more browsers. So in this example, we're asking for Chrome, and we're passing in some extra capabilities that we want, namely that we want it to run on the Windows Vista platform. And we're passing in the empty string as our version, so that we just get the latest version of Chrome that Sauce Labs has installed. So that's really all that we need to do to run on Sauce Labs. There is a little wrinkle, though. The way that Sauce Labs works is essentially to put the internet in between your code and the Selenium server. So Sauce Labs is totally identical to running Selenium scripts on your own computer, except for the Selenium server now lives outside of your computer, somewhere on the internet in our cloud of virtual machines. And typically when we're developing an app like this demo app, we're running it on localhost, and localhost is not usually publicly available to the rest of the internet. So there needs to be some kind of way that the browsers in Sauce Labs Cloud can talk to localhost on my computer. Thankfully, we have a tool called Sauce Connect. which is a secure tunnel software that creates a connection between your computer and Sauce Labs' cloud and enables Sauce Labs' browsers to see anything that your computer can see. So this will enable us to actually test localhost from outside of our own network. It's completely secure, and in fact, the reason that it takes a little while to load up here is that it's booting a completely pristine virtual machine in order to handle this connection, so that the data coming in and out of your tests can't be snooped on by anybody. So while that's loading, let's go ahead and add iPad support as well. So we'll get into some mobile testing here. And I'll comment out the local browsers because I don't want to run them anymore. So Sauce Connect is running. Now I'm going to run, let's just run our comment tests on Sauce. So the tests are kicking off. And while we don't see anything here yet, if we go to my test dashboard on Sauce Labs, we can see that we have some tests that are already running. And as before, they're just running one at a time, so it's a bit slow. One of the nice things about Sauce is that you can actually look at videos of your tests. This one just completed. So let's see what happened. So here's Chrome that's loaded up. It's going to localhost. And it made it. And here it found something on the page that it liked, and the test is over. We also give you the set of Selenium commands that were executed so that if anything goes wrong, it's relatively easy to debug your tests. Let's find another one that's in progress. Here's one that's running on iPad. And we can actually see it running the test right now. And I think it's finished. Yep. You'll have noticed that these tests have nice names, like comment test, test validation. That's because the sausage library that I was talking about automatically includes the name of the test and tells Sauce about it so that we can display it nicely here. And when things pass, it automatically reports the pass to Sauce Labs. It would also report a failure so that you could come in and see exactly what you're doing. But the problem here is, again, things are going really slow. So what we want to do is to run things in parallel. We can do that. Unfortunately, it's not as straightforward as we'd like it to be in PHP, because PHP unit doesn't have parallel test running built in quite yet. Because of that, I've written a little wrapper script for PHP unit that's called para-unit. And you know what? I'm just going to stop this test run for now. So when I run para-unit, I actually want to pass in the number of processes that I want to run simultaneously. And I've learned by experience that my localhost server isn't that sturdy. So if I have more than 5 or 10 processes hitting it at once, it might actually slow down so much that my Selenium tests time out. So I'm going to run 7 at a time here. And let's go ahead and run all of the tests in our test suite. So it's launching off. And pretty soon we should see, yep, now we have many more tests running at the same time. And let's find, here's an iPad test that's running. Okay, it's typing in some things and looking to make sure that certain fields are required. Let's see if any of our tests have started passing. Yep, a couple of them are finishing up, and you'll notice that we've already got 7 or 8 tests finished in less time than we had 3 or 4 tests finished before. So when you're running your Selenium tests, whether you're doing so locally or on Sauce Labs, you definitely want to take advantage of parallelism as much as you can. So let's go back to presentation really quick. So let's talk a little bit about mobile-specific issues with Selenium testing. One of the biggest things to keep in mind is that you have vastly different screen real estate and vastly different ways of rendering your site in that real estate. So the way that the iPhone zooms in or out automatically depending on what it thinks is best is different from the way that Android does. And so if it's important for your app that a certain element be visible on the page, for example, you want to be very careful about how your site looks in these different devices. It can also affect the execution of Selenium tests. If you're checking whether items are visible, your test might pass just fine in Chrome on the desktop, but not Safari on the iPhone because of the different size screen real estate. There's different ways of handling text input. The iPhone automatically capitalizes the first letter of input boxes often. And so if you are checking strings of text in your Selenium tests, some things might fail that you didn't expect because of these very strange changes in case. So you have to take care of that. The way that JavaScript executes in mobile browsers is sometimes different or more interesting than other browsers. So these are some issues you might run into when writing your Selenium tests. Something I like to do is actually to use Sauce to load up a mobile device and navigate to my site manually before I write tests to make sure that there aren't any glaring issues or things that are obviously wrong or are obviously going to trip up my tests. It's worth pointing out that this whole field of mobile test automation is relatively new. And at Sauce, we think that testing mobile web apps, the way that you saw in this demo, is a good start, but it's obviously not where we want to end up. There are 2 other main categories of mobile apps that also need to be tested. You have hybrid apps, which are basically a web app wrapped in some kind of native code so that it looks and feels like a native app on the outside, but is really a web browser on the inside. You also have native apps, which aren't web apps at all. And so up to now, Selenium hasn't really had a language to talk to those apps with. For those reasons, we are putting on something called the Mobile Test Summit, which is a conference that's happening. It's a one-day conference. It's happening in November. And a lot of the people who are kind of pushing the envelope in mobile test automation for the 3 different kinds of mobile apps that are out there are going to be at this conference talking about and demonstrating the technologies that they're developing to move mobile automation forward from web app testing all the way to native app testing. And if you check out the website, you'll see there are some really interesting talks lined up by people who have figured out how to do some very interesting automation of native apps as well as mobile web apps. And it's my personal hope that sometime around then, this fall, we'll be able to see a Selenium wrapper for native apps so that we can write our Selenium scripts and test against native apps. Unfortunately, I don't have any secret knowledge that makes me think that will be a reality, but that's my hope. And if we generate a lot of interest with this conference, hopefully we can all move that field together forward. All right, I'm going to open things up for questions. And so please just, I guess if you're confused like the dog on the right here, or if you feel like the balloon dog on the left, either way, go ahead and type me one of the questions that you have, and I'll find some interesting ones and respond to them. So one question, can you test actual apps for iOS and Google Play Store, or only websites? How about platforms such as PhoneGap? So I think I may have not seen this question earlier, and I think already answered it. These are the three different categories of apps that we definitely are going to support at SOS at some point, but right now only support the mobile web. So anything that you can use in Safari on iPhone or the Android web browser, things like that is what's currently supported. Another question, is there the capability to take manual control for the mobile device, in other words, iPad? There is, and I will demonstrate that right now. So let's kick off a test. Okay, this one's running in Chrome, and I'm not running it in parallel, so I'll just wait for that to end. And when we see the iPad, I'll take control of it. Someone else asked about testing touch and gestures. So the WebDriver API for Selenium actually supports different touch gestures, well, taps and flicks and swipes and things like that. So in terms of support for those commands, you'll need to look at the specific Selenium library that you're using. But as I'll show you here, this is called the JSON wire protocol, and it's the standard for the WebDriver commands that Selenium server accepts. You can see here we have different things like touch click, touch down, touch up, and so on. So touch click is the equivalent of a tap, and that has very different behavior in mobile devices than a regular click event does. So it looks like I missed my opportunity to take control of one of these iPads, but maybe you can just trust me that if you click on the live test that's running, there is the ability to click on the viewer window, and you can actually interact with the test as it's running, or you can stop the test and take control from there. Someone asked, do you support real iOS device testing? That's a good question. As you saw from the demo, right now we're using simulators, and that's because it was the fastest way to get virtualized cloud devices. We will eventually be supporting real devices, and we have some pretty exciting ideas about how to make that happen. But currently, we only have simulators available. Someone asked if you can switch between portrait and landscape with WebDriver. That's a good question. I know that we can switch between portrait and landscape using the simulator. Let's do a little bit of research right now and see if there's anything about orientation here in these commands. Looks like it. Yeah. So in fact, you're able to pass in a landscape or portrait value for the orientation. So again, it will depend on whether your Selenium library for your particular language supports this in a nice way, but it's theoretically possible. Looking at some other questions. Somebody asks if we can simulate HTML5 geolocation, and that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I imagine that might be different between the different mobile devices, but it's possible that they provide their own JavaScript hooks for simulating that, or that could be mocked reasonably well in JavaScript itself. Somebody asked if there's support for TestNG, and I believe there is, since Selenium is itself not tied to any particular test framework. You can use it with any testing framework or any programming language. In that sense, it's completely independent. So I don't know offhand what kind of support is available for TestNG, but it should be there. Somebody asked about testing video-based applications. There's no problem with doing that on SOS. The bandwidth of downloading a video is not part of what we limit for people. Currently at SOS, when you have a paid plan, you pay by the minute, or you get a bundle of minutes that you use. So if you're using SOS to test video, doesn't matter how much data your video contains, it matters how long your test is running. So if you choose a test that watches an hour-long video, it's going to be much more expensive for you and probably not cost-effective. Someone asked if you can test Ajax-based sites using Selenium. The answer is yes, pretty much. With Selenium, you can execute arbitrary JavaScript commands. So you can actually pass in a string to be executed as JavaScript. So you can do this to kick off an Ajax event if you want programmatically, or you can say click on a link which kicks off an Ajax event, and then wait for a period of time and then execute a piece of JavaScript which will return some value or some state that you're looking for. So at Sauce Labs, when we test important JavaScript interactions, we do so using this method, and it works fairly well. Some aspects of HTML5 aren't supported as well with Selenium, so testing Canvas, for example, is not very well supported. So if you want to test that a certain line is drawn in a canvas, you currently can't do something like that. But you can test JavaScript because you have the ability to execute arbitrary JavaScript in the browser using Selenium. Is there a limit to how many tests can run in parallel? That limit on sauce is specified by um, the kind of plan that you have. So different plans have different concurrency limits. So you can take a look at our pricing page and it'll have the details there. Practically, testing a localhost app, I've noticed that anywhere between 10 and 20 parallel sessions will actually start to crash my app or even crash my computer. Um, you're essentially DOSing your own server when you do that. So there's definitely a happy medium of how many tests to run in parallel if you're testing a limited resource localhost app. Now, if you have a fully fledged test server somewhere that can handle hundreds of simultaneous connections without any problem, then you want to crank up the parallelism to the max that your plan allows, as there's really no reason not to. See if I can find any more interesting questions. Somebody asked about talking about test write in comparison to the PHP unit approach of writing tests. So I'm not an expert on test write, so I'm probably not the person to talk about that, but I do know that at Sauce Labs we've talked about supporting a test write approach as well, and our goal is to have pain-free access to Sauce in whichever framework or library you want to use. So I personally been spending some time trying to make our PHP unit integration better, but there's no reason that we're favoring PHP unit over other frameworks. It's just a matter of having time to get to each one. And these are all open source projects, so if you're passionate about test write and Sauce Labs, we'd love for your help in making something awesome. Okay, well, I think that's about all the time we have for the different questions. I'd like to thank you guys for paying attention. And again, I think that if you're interested in the more complicated aspects of mobile app testing, it'd be a great idea to keep your eyes on the Mobile Summit website and try and come to that conference or see what comes out of it. I've heard about different collaborations between people who are attending that already sound really, really exciting, and will hopefully push mobile testing forward quite far. So thanks to all of you for coming, and we'll see you at the next webinar.